Welcome back, Seekers and Saints, to Fire in the Bones, and this is referring back to the sermon on December 3rd, the beginning of Advent. So, Pastor Shane this week talked about the lineage of Jesus, the genealogy, and what promises we can divine from that. And that got me thinking about a certain figure in the Christmas story, you might say, and reimagine it a little bit. Not really reimagine it, but think about it in a new way. And I'm talking about Zechariah. That's right. We hear about him a lot, and then we just kind of forget about him. But Zechariah is a great demonstration of those promises mentioned by Pastor Shane from the genealogy of Jesus. Let me explain. So in Luke 1, we read that Zechariah, for those who aren't familiar, maybe you're new to the faith, Zechariah was a priest who was doing his temple service in Jerusalem. And on the day it came for him to go in and do the incense around the altar, he was visited by the archangel Gabriel, who told him that he was going to bear a son, to which Zechariah responded, "How is that possible? Look how old I am, look how old my wife is, that's just not going to happen." And Gabriel said, "Well, it's going to happen, you will see, and because you don't believe, you're going to be stricken mute. You won't be able to speak until your son is born." I also forgot to mention that Gabriel mentioned that this child will go on to become a servant of the Lord and prepare the way for our Savior, and you will name him John. And it's not until he's named John after his circumcision that you will speak again. And sure enough, Zechariah was stricken mute. He couldn't speak until the baby was named John, and then he spoke again. So the question is, there's two real questions here. One, why would he doubt? And two, why would God punish him for doubting like that? Well, the genealogy of Jesus can explain a lot of that, the promises that Shane mentioned. First, let's go over why would he doubt? Well, here's where I get a little bit of speculation, but we can infer it from the circumstances that he lived in. One, and that is, Zechariah lived in the time of 400 years of silence. There had been no prophets. There had been no proclamations of God, no miraculous doings like a Red Sea parting. It was just radio dark from God. Now, sure, there were teachers, preachers, and other events happening, but if you were to ask, if this were the time period that you had to research what was God saying in this 400 years, easy answer, nothing. He wasn't saying anything. So Zechariah was basing it off of, well, God hasn't really done anything like this for a while. Would he really start now, and with me of all people? Number two would be, no doubt, there were a lot of false teachers at the time. Rabbis, preachers, teachers, all of that was still going on. And Alexander the Great and Greek influence had come into the church, or rather the temple. And there were a lot of mixing and matching going on. And he was probably concerned about that and thinking, I don't want to be another one of these guys that goes around proclaiming I heard the Spirit of God. No. A third reason is, who am I? I'm not, okay, God did this for Abraham, but I'm no Abraham. I'm just me. A final reason is Zechariah was looking at the limits that he was in. Okay, 400 years of silence. He's just a guy. He's just a priest. Granted, that's a little bit higher on the echelon, the hierarchy, but he wasn't apparently anyone of that much import. And also, he knew his age limits. As someone who for a long time, my wife and I struggled with infertility for a long time, God be praised, we're having a baby now. But I can understand this. I can remember when people would come up to me in church, oh, I had a vision that you're going to have a baby soon. And I thought, oh, that's sweet. Thank you for trying, but put your basic lid on it. I don't want to hear it right now. And I'm not the only one. Anybody else who struggled with this knows this feeling. So of course there was a little bit of doubt. So with all this in mind, why punish him? Why stricken him with this? Well, let's look back at some of the things that Shane mentioned, that the genealogy reminds us about the promises of God. Forgetting the obvious is the first problem of Zechariah. We learn that ordinary people are used by God. That was one of the points Shane brought up. that from Judah to Tamar to Rahab, two of whom were prostitutes, to David. David was a nobody, kind of. He was just the runt of the litter. Him being a king, when Samuel first saw him, he was like, really? That kid is going to be a king? All sorts of people throughout the lineage. Women who were considered nothing, especially prostitutes, were added to this list of people used by God. So why not Zechariah? In fact, that's why God uses them, so he can say, look what I did. So he can MacGyver humanity. Look what I did with this pen spring. Look what I did with this ordinary nobody, that kind of thing. You know, in Greek mythology, it was always a demigod or something that the gods used. Not here. So, and Zechariah would have been aware of that, and he forgot it. But more to the point, I want to posit, was this really a punishment? Think about it. Gabriel does say, because you did not believe. And sure, maybe it was. I'm not going to say it wasn't, not 100%. But there could also be God's answer to our limitations and say, all right, because you didn't believe, I'm going to show you. Because I'll tell you right now, if I were Zechariah, if God came to me and said, Mark, you're going to get through this difficult time, and because you don't believe me, you're not going to speak for the next 6 months. I'm going to start believing that promise real quick. The only question I'm going to have is a matter of when, not if. And I'm sure that's what Zechariah thought. I'm sure as soon as he finished his temple service and went back home to his village with his wife, the first thing he thought was, time to make a baby. Because he knew that was pure proof. So I posit Zechariah did nothing wrong, really, also. Because consider this, if he wasn't the man for the job, would God have chosen him? I mean, God knows our hearts, according to 1 Samuel 16:7. And he also purifies those who are in him, based on 1 Peter 1:7 and Malachi 3:2. So, was God frustrated? Probably. Could this have been a punishment? Maybe. It's possible. But knowing Zechariah's heart, knowing this is the guy that's going to raise up the servant I need to prepare the way for Jesus, God needed to get Zechariah on board, and this was the way to do it. So here's the conclusion of the matter. The promises of God and his grace work regardless of our station, intransigence, or doubt. God gives us grace and promises us greatness, maybe not wealth or power, but promises to do good things through us regardless of our station and where we are. And when we have trouble with that, when we doubt it, he just doesn't say, too bad, next. Nope, he works through it. He gets us back in line somehow. Sometimes it's extreme, sometimes not. In Zechariah's case, it was extreme. That's all for today on Fire in the Bones. Thanks for joining me and have a good week.